This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's enter the issue to our panel of experts. They include Syndicated columnist and author of the new book Catalyst, John Hood, former Secretary of State, former Attorney General Rufus Edmisten, former House Speaker Joe Mavretic, and current NC Policy Watch Chairman Chris Fitzsimon. I guess chairman is the right term, isn't it?
You can call me anything.
Director. This week's show promises to be informative. We're going to begin with a discussion about the bond referendum we're going to be asked to vote on in March. We'll also talk about the NCAE and a call to discontinue dues checkoffs from state teachers' paychecks. And we'll discuss a new federal funding transportation for North Carolina and how we're going to benefit. And as always, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. Even though many of us are focusing on Christmas in just a few days at the end of the year, in 85 days, primary elections are going to be held in our state. We've been talking about them in recent weeks, but one vote that hadn't gotten much attention is the Connect NC bond referendum that'll be on the ballot. Voters are going to be asked to approve $2 billion in borrowing to improve public infrastructure. Since taking office, Governor McCrory has been pointing out North Carolina's need to build and restructure to meet the needs of today and the future. The legislature passed the bond legislation in the closing days of session and placed it on the March ballot. Question one to Joe. It's widely acknowledged that the Senate wasn't enthusiastic about this bond. Some speculate the legislators put it on the March primary ballot because they knew there would be a large turnout. Others think there'd be so much talk about the presidential and other races that this would just get lost in the shuffle. What do you think?
Tom, I find it hard to believe that you lose $2 billion. That's about 10% of a whole state budget. I think that the engineers, the construction folks, anybody who has interest in infrastructure, they need to get their act together, get some television money, and advertise and promote this bond.
And get it on quick.
And get it done quick, because they're going to have to fight for time, for airtime, television time. But $2 billion really takes care of the critical needs, doesn't address the long-range issues.
Rufus, I want to talk specifically about these projects, but before we get into it, I've got to bring up a recent ruling by the State Board of Elections in which they had been asked to rule on whether someone who had declared to run for election could appear on the bond ads that Joe was talking about. The State Board came back and said no, that couldn't happen. Now, some people are saying this was to prevent Pat McCrory from being on the bond ads and getting free time. You agree or disagree with that?
That's been a long-standing thing, that you're not supposed to use state money to promote yourself. And I'll go back to what Joe said. George Little, was it 15 years ago, with the biggest bond issue in the history of North Carolina for higher education, he got with it. He's from down in Southern Pines, and I hope that the governor's consulted with George Little, because he can do exactly what you said, because you got to plan these things ahead. It's going to get lost in the shuffle, and this is not as sexy as highway money, my friend. This is a lot to do with parks and buildings, but I think it's very, very worthy and should be passed if they'll do their homework.
John, supporters for this bond campaign say that we can incur this debt without raising taxes, and we can borrow the money at historically low interest rates, even though the Feds raised interest rates this past week. Is that a compelling argument for passage?
Those are important arguments for the electorate to hear. They are both true on their face, though you have to be careful when you talk about taxes. The main reason why that is true is because debt service is otherwise going to fall. So essentially, because we're paying off bonds that have been issued in the past, and so if you issue additional bonds under this bond issue, in the long run, debt service budget doesn't go up. It doesn't go down as much is really what happens. Now, of course, if you didn't issue the bonds, you could, in theory, reduce taxes because the debt service is going down. So it still has a cost. We're not arguing, no one should argue that it has no cost. And as to the general fix here, Bond issues are a tough sell right now, I think. I think most of them are still passing, but it's a lot harder to make the case because people are nervous and antsy. What they've got going for, what the bond proponents have going for them right now is there isn't any organized statewide opposition. If that continues, then that gives them the opportunity to pass the bond, but they're still going to have to work it.
Although the polls, Chris, show that a poll that was taken shows that about 60% of the population is in favor of it, about 34% is opposed to it. Following up on John's point, does that indicate that there is opposition?
Well, I think there's people are worried about the economy, worried about the debt, and worried about the government, the conservative folks. I think the issue is, I think it was, they put it on the ballot to answer your initial question. They put it on the ballot. They wanted to get it issued as fast as they can and get some of these projects started. You could say that was to get them started because we need them. You could also say that if there's some bonds issued in the summer and there's some jobs created, that'll help the governor, whatever. I don't have a problem with it being on the ballot. I do think John's right. Without an organized opposition, it's hard to imagine it losing, with one exception. This will be, if the Republican primary, the presidential primary, is still very competitive and heated, and the real conservative base of the Republican primary shows up, some of those folks, probably reflexively, if they don't know a lot about it, are inclined to vote against it. So I think that's where it might be closer than we think if there's not an effective campaign by the pro-bond folks.
All right, so if we look at this bond referendum, 49% of the funds are going to be spent to build new buildings on UNC campuses. 17% will go for community colleges, 16% for local water and sewer and local parks, 9% for agriculture, 5% for our parks and our zoos. Very quickly around the table, what do you think of this allocation formula? Is this about right? Too much? Too little?
I think one of the things we ought to focus on is the percentage that's going to the university system. I think take a hard look at that to make sure that the bottom half of the campuses get the majority of those dollars.
Anybody else comment?
I wish we had more money for the park system. That's for all generations to come.
The university share is really higher than the 49 because most of that agriculture category is really a building that's at NC State.
NC Plant
So it's mostly for universities. I actually think that the most politically saleable parts of the bill or the bond package have to do with water and sewer projects and community college projects. They are spread all around the state, and you could argue water and sewer in particular. That's a real infrastructure need that is going unwanted.
But Chris, they were trying to spread this money around all the counties in the state. I think, what is it, 73 of the 100 counties or 76 of the 100 counties get some of the bond money. Did that water it down? Are that too many lights on the Christmas tree?
No, I think it's easier to sell it if you have more counties involved and more local officials who are excited about it, and the governors and other folks have been going around the state talking about the individual projects. I think that's an effective way to sell it.
Absolutely. That's exactly how the Highway Trust Fund got sold in 89 and 90, because everybody shared.
Everybody had a stake in it.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll be back, and certainly we'll be talking about these bonds more between now and March 15th. We thank you for watching NC Spin on the air or on YouTube. Here's a reminder, there's much more on our website, ncspin.com, or NC Spin on Facebook. You'll find video footage not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel, and our weekly column. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, or on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets. When we come back, we're going to talk about the NCAE and Democrats.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Phones are getting smarter, cars more efficient, TVs bigger and more stunning. Imagine the same innovation from agriculture. Meet the Plant Sciences Initiative at NC State, a proposed state-of-the-art research complex where world-class researchers will tackle agriculture's toughest challenges, like feeding the world's rapidly growing population while preserving natural resources for future generations. Join Farm Bureau and NC State in moving North Carolina to the forefront of ag research in the world. Visit keepaggrowing.org.
Everyone, I'm Linda Loveland. If feeding your family safe, affordable foods is a priority for you, then join me in saying thanks to the North Carolina farmers who feed us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's say thanks to the farmers who feed your family at #ThankNCFarmers. To learn more about the foods we eat and the farm families who feed us, visit feedthedialoguenc.com. And be sure to thank North Carolina farmers.
We now return to NC Spin.
If you follow North Carolina politics at all, no doubt you're aware of the ongoing disagreements between the North Carolina Association of Educators and Republicans. That group's been outspoken in its opposition to the Republican-controlled legislature. Before the filing deadline ended, and even with the opposition in the gubernatorial primary, NCAE endorsed Democrat Roy Cooper in the gubernatorial election. It wasn't a coincidence that the same week a Senate Republican leader called on the state controller to audit NCAE in order to prevent them from deducting dues checkoffs from members of the NCAE. Rufus, NCAE is almost a 100% record of endorsing Democrats, so picking the Democratic nominee for governor was no surprise. But were you a little surprised the endorsement came before the primary election was held, especially since there are others on the ticket?
Well, in 1984, they endorsed everybody but Rufus. But other than that, it is somewhat unusual.
You don't feel aggrieved about it.
I don't feel aggrieved. But anyway, I think what happened is that they're saying, look, let's get our biggest bang for our buck. Why mess around with some primary? And I think we all know that Roy Cooper is almost 99% going to be the nominee. And then I don't think it's anybody's big surprise that the Republicans are saying that this is aided by state government when you deduct the dues. And I'll put it this way. If they are no longer deducted, you can count the NCAE dead.
Well, I was going to ask the question about that. Joe, how does NCAA ever expect to get any favorable treatment over in the legislature as long as they're controlled by Republicans if they are essentially a de facto Democratic stamp?
Well, let me go back to 1989. In 1989, one of the sticking points on the budget was a House position that said the North Carolina will pick up that umbrella coverage for teachers. We passed it. It was a part of the budget. It lasted for 2 years. Dan Blue reversed that when he became a speaker. But if the Republicans want to know how to handle this, regardless of what the court says, the way to do this is to simply pay for the umbrella coverage that teachers get, which is the big selling point by NCAE for membership. And that umbrella cost about $10 a teacher, and the teachers would then be able to take home at least $200 more a year from not having to pay that NCAA dues.
John,
well, that's just more debt.
Yeah.
More debt.
They did that.
I think the legislature has, in fact, done what you said, Joe. That's one of the problems the NCAA is having trouble.
Yeah, but the legislature also passed a law saying that if NCAE has to have 40,000 members minimum in order to be able to have this dues check off. Now, they've asked NCAE to come forward with their membership rosters and rolls, and they've refused to do so. They've admitted that there has been some shrinkage in membership. What does it tell you that they won't produce their membership numbers?
It tells me they've probably fallen below the threshold. This is not that complicated. If NCAE believes that the bill that is, or the provision that established the threshold is itself illegal or unconstitutional in some way, they should go to court and fight it. They've fought on this related issue before in the courts. They should go fight it. But in the meantime, it is the law of North Carolina. It is absolutely required that they prove that they meet the threshold. Otherwise, they don't get the deduction. This is not that complicated. I think they know that. They don't want to fess up because I suspect, of course, nobody knows for sure, I suspect they fall below the threshold, which means the payroll deduction should go poof.
Chris, if in fact they have fallen below that reduction number, does it mean they're no longer an effective voice for teachers?
Well, it makes it much more difficult. I don't agree with Rufus that they're dead, but I mean, they've been under attack. Remember, the legislature called an unannounced special session of the General Assembly at midnight to punish NCAE, I guess, what was that, 2013 maybe? Which I had never seen before, where they adjourned the session, had a special session just to go after NCAE. There was a famous episode. The Republican caucus left the mics on. They were talking very disparagingly about NCAE. So there's no love lost and has been for a long time. I still think teachers need an effective association voice in the General Assembly. I still think there's value in having a collective interest down at the General Assembly to argue and lobby and do those things. But it's going to make it much harder on NCAA if they don't have the dues checkoff.
And Rufus, back to you. There are other organizations like the State Employees Association of North Carolina that haven't come under the microscope here. Obviously they have more than 40,000 members. Does this tell you that the legislature is just targeting NCAE, just picking on them?
Syndicated hadn't aggravated the legislature nearly as much as the NCAE, and that's human nature. And
they ought to be treated the same.
Well, they should be, but the politics is a very strange bedfellow there. You know that. It's just the way it is. And the legislature, I think, as John said, though, if NCAE doesn't like it, say that your 40,000 is arbitrary and capricious, go to court, and it is. It really is. It's an arbitrary thing because it was set for a reason. And this is all very political. And the SENIC, the State Employees Association, has a long way to go back up because of some of the scandals they've had. But they have managed
they're still well above
to
that.
mind themselves pretty nicely.
All right, Joe, let's suppose you were a consultant hired to help NCAE. What advice would you give them to help themselves?
I think the first thing is it's strategic. NCAE really does not concern itself with student excellence, student performance, bettering the student product in North Carolina. It concerns itself almost exclusively with teachers and what they can do for teachers. And the problem that we're now addressing really started way back when the Democrats had control, and NCAE grabbed the reins on the topics to be discussed and debated. And that's still going on. The Republicans are trying to reverse that. But if you think about what NCAE does, they encourage us to talk about teacher salaries. They encourage us not to have a performance evaluation that would lead to differential pay. They continue to try to tell us that the most important person in a school building are the teachers, and all the information that I've ever seen was that the principal is the key person in a school building. And so NCAE focuses on what is good for teachers, but they really don't have any major issues on this is how we can do better for students.
I got to jump in for 30 seconds. I disagree with that. I think there are a lot of people that think the most important thing to a child, how a child does, is how well the teacher is doing his or her job. And NCAE, you can disagree with some of the things they're doing, but I think we need well-compensated, well-qualified teachers in the classroom, and I'm glad NCAE is there pushing for that. We can disagree with the policies, but we need somebody standing up for teachers.
All my third graders have done beautifully in this world. I want you to know that.
And they're now 86 years old. After these messages, we're going to talk about Congress acts fast, but slowly.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
North Carolina's transportation budget is heavily dependent on federal funding, but Congress has been unable to agree on long-term appropriations. Finally, they acted on what's called FAST, Fixing America's Surface Transportation, with a $305 billion appropriation over the next 5 years. Governor Pat McCrory praised the measure, saying this will provide North Carolina the certainty we need to continue to build the roadmap in our 25-year transportation vision. Among the projects being funded will be an interstate highway corridor from Wake County to Morehead City and a freeway from Raleigh to Norfolk. John, traditionally North Carolina hasn't fared very well in getting federal dollars. How well did we get treated from FAST?
Well, okay. When you group all federal spending and revenues together, which is really the only meaningful way to do this. It used to be back in the 70s, 80s, into the mid-90s, North Carolina did lose. You know, for every dollar we spent to Washington, we got back, 85 cents or 90 cents or 92 cents. Actually, in the last few years, that's flipped around. We get about $1.08 for every dollar we send. That is still not a bargain, because, of course, all the strings are attached. It really costs you more than $1 to get the dollar, so it's still a bad deal. As far as FAST is concerned, you mentioned that these two potential interstate corridors were funded. Not really. They were designated. But there's just not enough money to fund all the projects that everybody in North Carolina and around the country wants. Just not enough money.
Well, the question I was going to ask, Chris, is are these the two highest priority projects in our state?
Well, the governor certainly talked a lot about, especially the highway to Norfolk, and not respecting state line or going across state lines and realizing that the people in northeastern North Carolina have more in common with Tidewater than they do parts of North Carolina. So I don't object necessarily to the highways, but I do think any discussion of this, the needs far outweigh these projects, and we still are going to have to figure out how to pay for all these highways, federal government and the state government.
And the state government. And Joe, we're talking about priorities. I-95 is desperately in need of maintenance as well as expansion.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. We just were on 95, and half of 95 from the intersection at 64-264 north is in very good shape. And going south, it's probably better than South Carolina's I-95. Let's go back to the 158. The freeway starts at 95 and goes over to Hampton Roads. That's on the roadbed of 158. It goes right through what many folks have been calling for decades the eastern Appalachia of North Carolina. That's the best thing that could possibly happen for that area in the long run.
Have you all ever heard of Western North Carolina? That's all I've heard around this table right now.
I read about it.
How about a little bit of that money up there?
Is that Knoxville? I can't.
Well, there's a place called Boone and Asheville and Cherokee. It is amazing to me that, and I love being able to go from here to, well, not necessarily Norfolk. I've lost nothing up there. The Wilmington 40 is the greatest thing in the world, but let's be fair about it. Western North Carolina deserves some of this too.
I remember back in the old days when Martin Nesbitt said to Liston Ramsey that they had to make sure they had a freeway going up to Asheville to haul all the highway money from Raleigh up to the western part of the state.
But this issue of funding, to John's point, this is something that still hasn't been addressed on either the federal level or the state level.
Just to give you an example, the FAST bill that was just passed is partially funded by the prospect of selling oil
reserves,
oil in the future at a price that is far higher than the current price. Now, it might be, but it might not be. It's very speculative. I wouldn't count on very much. We need to fix the way we fund highways. Charging per gallon to fund highways is an archaic system that is not going to work in the
and the funding our delegation, Tom, is a lot stronger than it used to be. You think of the seniority we have. We do a lot better nowadays about getting money from Washington.
All right, well, we're going to follow this and watch the roads being built, I hope. After these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Hey everyone, I'm Linda Loveland. If feeding your family safe, affordable foods is a priority for you, then join me in saying thanks to the North Carolina farmers who feed us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's say thanks to the farmers who feed your family at #ThankNCFarmers. To learn more about the foods we eat and the farm families who feed us, visit feedthedialoguenc.com. And be sure to thank North Carolina farmers.
Clean transportation options can help you fuel what matters.
We're fueling what matters to us by converting our fleet of collection trucks over to compressed natural gas. It's a good, smart business decision, and having the air cleaner is something that benefits all the families that work with us.
We use biodiesel in our heavy equipment. We've got propane in a lot of our police cars, and we've really embraced the electric car. Join the city of Raleigh and fuel what matters.
To learn how you can fuel what matters, visit fuelwhatmatters.org.
Phones are getting smarter, cars more efficient, TVs bigger and more stunning. Imagine the same innovation from agriculture. Meet the Plant Sciences Initiative at NC State, a proposed state-of-the-art research complex where world-class researchers will tackle agriculture's toughest challenges, like feeding the world's rapidly growing population while preserving natural resources for future generations. Join Farm Bureau and NC State in moving North Carolina to the forefront of ag research in the world. Visit keepaggrowing.org.
We love the section of the show when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, start with you.
I've talked before about the possible scandal we're going to have in North Carolina about a virtual online charter school run by the company K-12 Incorporated. If you want to read something interesting, the former education commissioner of Tennessee, a conservative Republican appointed by a conservative Republican governor, wrote a scathing essay about K-12 Incorporated in Tennessee. Everybody should read that scandal's coming to North Carolina.
Joe, tell us something we don't know.
Rufus, in 1982, I publicly asked NCAE not to endorse me, and I won 5 elections after that.
All right, Rufus, tell us something we don't know.
Why has the legislature not passed a constitutional amendment to keep the state from condemning private property and giving it to other private property? Right. I think that's awful.
All right, John, tell us something we don't know.
We've talked about how North Carolina broadcasters are going to do well in the coming few months because of the presidential primary in the state. But other media companies, newspapers, are still in desperate straits. Expect to see additional shrinkage and layoffs, unfortunately, in the coming weeks and months.
Wow. From the print media primarily?
From print media, yeah.
And my understanding is that the candidates still don't have a whole lot of money, so they aren't buying a whole lot of ads.
The presidential candidates are reserving a lot of space.
Are they?
Yeah.
All right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll have a group of more information about public issues in North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.